a playlist original.
The Roots of the Science podcast with your girl, Anne with an E.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Root of the Science podcast with your girl, Anne with an E. It's 2022. Can you believe it? This means that it's season 3 of the podcast. Oh my goodness, I am so excited. If you are new here, thank you for tuning in. Now, for my fellow old listeners, thank you so much for coming back. Remember that if you want to subscribe and listen to the show, you can do so on Apple Podcasts, your Spotify, or Google, or wherever else you listen to your podcast. So for today, my guest is Rufaro Samanga from South Africa. She's an epidemiologist, a culture writer, a public health writer, and speaker who is passionate about addressing misinformation around COVID vaccine hesitancy. In this episode, she shares about her academic journey, specifically how she found out about a career in epidemiology. Rufaro gets open and honest about the challenges in her academic journey and the mental health struggles she had to overcome in the process. She then explains how the lessons in her own academic journey will positively shape the type of academic she aspires to be, particularly for Black students. Rufaro explains to us what her role as a digital epidemiologist is, which is her current job. Lastly, she discusses the future prospects of her pursuing a PhD in public health, specializing in epidemiology and biostatistics. Her topic of interest will be on COVID-19 hesitancy in South Africa. Tune in as we hear about all of this and, of course, so much more. Let's go. Hi, Rufaro. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm so excited to have you. Like, I've been fangirling for the longest time. So, like, this is long overdue, but we are here. So thank you so much for coming onto the show.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So before we get into it, I'm sure everyone is like, oh my gosh, and you always say this about everybody. So please, may you introduce yourself so that people can understand why I'm so excited to have you. So where are you currently based and what do you currently do? Just in brief before we get into it.
Sure. So I'm Rufaro Samanga. I'm an epidemiologist by profession. I'm currently based in Johannesburg, South Africa, and I work for a data science company where I am a digital epidemiologist, where I'm basically trying to bridge the gap between data science and artificial intelligence with traditional epidemiology and biostatistics. When I'm not doing epidemiology, I'm writing a bunch of stuff about, science and public health and doing a lot of addressing misinformation, especially around COVID-19 vaccine hesitancy. So that's basically me in a nutshell.
Yeah, fantastic. And I love how you already brought that up in the beginning. We're going to get into the digital epidemiology later, but you did mention that away from the sciences, you actually do have other interests. You're not just a scientist, which I absolutely love. And you've had a very non-linear academic journey. You touched on the stuff that you do. So the writings that you do. Can you just tell us more about you away from the science, and then we get into all of that? How did you get involved in that?
For sure. So I always say, I had a very traditional academic career, but in terms of my professional career, that's been a little unconventional. So of course, all my qualifications were in the sciences, but in terms of outside of the sciences, I, was involved in the student Fees Must Fall movement back in 2015, 2016. And I started freelancing for a company called OK Africa. So, I'd write opinion pieces about this is what actually happening on the ground. This is how students are mobilizing, talking about militarization of campuses, fighting against the police and all of those things. So that was my entry point into writing. So it was basically about student activism. And, as I continued with my studies, I still continued to write. And, as time went on, I didn't only, of course, write about student activism. I started writing about a bunch of other things. As a Black feminist, I would write things about Black feminism through different lenses. I wrote about gender-based violence, very important woman. I'm a lover of books, African literature especially. So I did a lot of work around highlighting really influential Black women writers in the space, the African literature space. And from there, I just, kept writing. I wrote about sex. I wrote about relationships. I wrote about politics, which, pissed a lot of people off. I wrote about activism in general. So yeah, that's the writing side of things. I would be what you call a culture writer, in the sense that you really are writing about the culture, but the culture in the sense like pop culture, but not just like frivolous, oh, this person did a this or did a that. It's not tabloid journalism, but it's, different aspects of culture, arts and culture, politics, literature, film, all of those things. So yeah, that was me for literally 4 years. That's what I did. And then the last 2.5 years of those 4 years, I was actually employed full-time at OK Africa as a culture writer. And that's literally what I did. Got to interview a number of amazing people. Yeah. Probably, some of the most memorable moments that I've had to date in my life. Yeah. And it was really impactful in the sense that it was a different kind of storytelling. And I think at the heart of things, I am a storyteller.
I like the fact that you brought up it's a different types of storytelling, because my next question was like, in academia, there's a formal standardized way of how to write, specifically in science, right? So now you are a storyteller, right? Which is completely different. You get to have your own opinion, because science, for example, it's more objective. You have to be objective, third person. It's not necessarily your thoughts. So was it difficult for you which one do you enjoy more? Like, is there one where you're like, this is what I love? Or can you just do the both and you love it like two twins, if I can say so? Like, a mother who loves.
Yeah. You're quite right. I mean, the two are very different, right? Academia is very formal, very rigid. It's always evidence-based and, has to be written in a specific way. Whereas culture writing, across different publications, style might vary, but it's a lot more conversational. It's definitely not academic. The aim is not to bore the reader, right? I wouldn't say that I like one more than the other. I think because of sort of like, my career trajectory, because I did the sciences in parallel with the writing, I developed like a dexterity and the ability to move between the two. So if I was writing up my dissertation, it's, dissertation mode, that a paragraph is like 1 million references and, all of those things. And then, and then when I close my laptop and, now I'm at work and I'm at OK Africa, the brand has a very specific voice, a very specific way of storytelling. Their narrative is very specific. And so it was just really developing that dexterity and ability to switch between the two. But I quite appreciated, both of them. And I think in equal measure, academia serves its purposes, it's a community of peers in your field and all of that. And so, sometimes it is important to communicate in a way that is standard, right, across the board. But what I loved about the culture writing, although it's very different in the way that it's written, is its ability to be very relatable across the board, right? So even an academic could read a piece about, Zakesam Da and his new book, and it's very relatable, it's accessible, it's fun, it's good stuff to read. So I wouldn't say I have a preference for either or. I think if I had a preference, then, I wouldn't have continued to do both, which I still do now. So yeah, I appreciate for both their advantages in each case.
Yeah. Ambidextrous writer, which is fantastic. So now we're going to just go back to the beginning. Okay, you told us more about you in terms of the way from the sciences. So now we need to understand how did the genesis of you getting into science even start? Because like you said, that you had a very linear academic journey. So can you talk us more into, the roots of your science?
So I started off in the lab-based sciences. So 2013 started my first year and I was doing a BSc in biological sciences. This was at WITS. And then I decided I wanted to, so there are two streams that, within that, biological sciences that you can either go, you can go into what's called APES, which is animal, plant, and environmental sciences, or you can go into MCB, which is molecular and cell biology. And I was very intrigued by how do things work on a single cell quintile level, because we can explain, a lot of things that happen on a macro level, but I just was so fascinated by being able to explain, you have a headache because on a cellular level, this is what's happening. I geek out on stuff like that. So that's the route that I took, and I majored in biochemistry and microbiology. For my honors, I did some really cool stuff in what's called nanobiotechnology. So I was basically making gold nanoparticles using bacteria.
What?
Crazy stuff.
That's so cool.
Right? It was really cool. A lot of hard work, but it was, really cool, really novel work. But I was very aware by the end of my honors year that I did find being in the lab quite tedious. It's repetitive. When you're running experiments, you need to run them at least 3 times, just as a form of, validating the results that you have, making sure that, you haven't gotten them by chance. And I just got tired of test tubes and mixing stuff. And this is, not even a dig at the molecular sciences. It's more than just, test tubes and that. But I felt like, you're in the lab, and it wasn't as enthusing for me as I would have liked for it to be. I wanted to be in science. I wanted to explore infectious diseases. I loved statistics, but I didn't want to be in the lab. And at the time, I just didn't know what program could encompass those things. So I actually took a gap year after my honors, and I said to my mom, I just need time to figure things out. I think she didn't really have an issue with it because, one, my mom is, a lot more progressive as a Black parent, a Black mother. And 2, I just spent, the whole year writing, so I was still making money as a freelancer. And towards the end of the year, I discovered this thing called epidemiology. And more so, I found out that WITS had an epidemiology and biostatistics master's degree. And I was like, this is perfect. I get to, study the distribution of diseases, which is what I wanted to do. And I also get to do all the stats, which is, something that I'm very passionate about. So yeah, I applied. And the next year, which was 2018, I started my master's in epidemiology and biostatistics. And that I recently graduated this year in about April. So it was a 3-year journey. Started off, the intention was to do it via coursework and like a mini little, research project. But I do have ambitions of, becoming an academic, a researcher. So I asked the faculty, can I actually do this degree via dissertation? They're like, well, we've never done that before, but, we can try. And, after some motivations from my supervisors, actually was the first student to do the degree via full dissertation. So instead of like a 10,000 word research project, I ended up actually writing up a 35,000 word dissertation. So yeah, it was a lot of work. It was hard. It was probably one of the hardest things that I've done to date. But when I graduated, it was just so fulfilling. It was just like that moment of everything that you want and have been working towards finally comes to fruition. Yeah.
Wow, that's so amazing. What a journey. And first of all, kudos to your mom, because with most African parents, I'll be like, why? You need to continue studying. So I love the fact that she gave you that time to figure out what you want to do. And also just, you had that privilege to actually figure, because sometimes some people do want to, but then circumstances do not allow for that to happen. And also the fact that you had a vision, like you said, you had a vision, you pushed yourself beyond the limit of just doing a normal coursework master's, and you're like, no, I want to do your full thesis. You did say that, oh no, it was difficult. Did you have moments where you're like, I should have just done a coursework, I would have been done with this like when I wanted to? Or were you just like, okay, you know what, I'm gonna push through, I know what's happening?
You know what, there were moments where I was just like, you know what, it would have been so much easier, so much quicker as well, because because I ended up doing it via dissertation, it actually added a year. So I ended up spending 3 years on my master's, whereas a lot of my peers were either 18 months or 2 years. So in some aspects, I felt like, oh my goodness, this is such a drag. And I had 3 supervisors. It's difficult enough having one. 2 is a bit of a push, but I had 3, and they were also not very supportive. So, it was outside of the difficulty of writing up a dissertation. I think also the circumstances around that, supervisor support, the bureaucracies of, the university and all of those things, they made it very difficult. And, to be quite honest, several times I actually said to my mother, I'm going to drop out. I don't think that this is working. I'd rather go and do, an MSc in epidemiology overseas for a year, because I feel like I've been at this for so long, I'm actually not sure if this degree is going to come out. So there were many times where I felt like this is not working. You also you feel like a failure. I definitely felt, like a failure. I'm a type A personality, and my dad was very instrumental in, we need to do well at school, and he was very supportive of that. And I think that's where the nerdiness in me came. So I think also because, my master's was dedicated to my dad, all the delays and, the feelings around this actually might not happen just made me feel like, one, I've not only failed myself as, this self-acclaimed top student, but also like I'd failed my dad, because I'd said like, I'm going to finish this master's degree. So I had many breakdowns. I, as someone who also, suffers with very bad clinical depression, there were very many moments where I was suicidal. I was just not functional. It was bad. I'm so thankful for the support structure that I had. There were times when I'd be trying to work on a deadline because faculty says this, but my supervisors are not responding. And I'd become so hysterical to the point where, I just would not know what to do. And my mom would always say to me, come home. And I'd go home, I'd leave my laptop, I wouldn't think about the masters. And, I just allow my mom and my family to, just be there to distract me from everything else that was happening. Because at some point, it actually starts to feel like the masters is your life. There is nothing outside of the masters. So I'm so thankful that I had a very supportive, and still do have a very supportive mom. At the time, my previous partner was also very supportive, during that process. So I think without my tribe, and these are people that I actually acknowledged in my master's, and I said, without my tribe, I don't think that this master's would have been possible. So yeah, it's important to have your people in your corner, because these things can be very mentally taxing.
Sure. Yeah, no, you're giving me goosebumps, because I appreciate your honesty and your vulnerability, because there's so many of us who can relate, not only at master's level, even at undergraduate level or postgraduate level, whatever level, we go through so much as students. And I think especially when you are like that student who has always been a top achiever, and when things are sort of out of your control, like you said, it's something to do with the faculty. It's not because you are not, it's not because you are incapable of doing it, but it's just things that are out of your hands, and you just feel like everything is falling apart.
Exactly.
And maybe you haven't really figured out, maybe you do have some mental health issues that you aren't even aware of, and those sort of manifest themselves during all of this stuff. I really appreciate that you mentioned that you suffered, and you endured, and you've been honest. And I know you said that you actually aspire to be an academic, when you finish and you get your PhD and you become a doctor. You even tweet about this, so we know this is going to happen. We're going to have those days where you're going to be like, it's happened. So do you think, because of everything that you went through and the struggles that you went through, it will shape you to be the kind of academic that you wish you had during your masters? Or not even the academic, the type of support that you wish you had when you were going through everything that you were going through?
Absolutely. I think before that, even, when you're in varsity, whether it's undergrad or postgrad, as a Black student, you're already aware that your experiences are very different to the experiences of white kids, right?
Yes.
Systemic racism is still a thing. And so that's something that you're already contending with, right? And so from undergrad, I could always kind of tell that I was treated a little bit differently because I speak with a twang versus one of, my classmates who might not have spoken English the way that I do, but I knew he was super smart, probably smarter than me, right? And so you pick up on all these microaggressions, these micro insults that really form a part of this, still racist system, especially at these historically white institutions, right? And so from there on, I just, would always say that whenever I'm at varsity, whether I'm a student or whether I'm a teaching assistant, because I was a teaching assistant for a couple of years, I wanted my students, especially my Black students, to feel comfortable. I didn't want them to feel like they're stupid. I didn't want them to feel like maybe because their language skills aren't at a certain level that they don't deserve to be here. So I think already it was in my mind that the way that I treat my students, and especially my Black students, has to be different to the way that other people, especially white people, are going to be treating them. So I think there was always that fundamental understanding that there must be something different that I do. And, as this love, or rather interest in, hey, I actually want to become an academic, and more so I want to lecture students. I think after my experience, especially, and also, the experiences of my colleagues and my peers, and when people share about their own, experiences, whether it's an undergrad or postgrad, and they're Black, you see that it's a prevailing problem, right? So there's fundamentally something very toxic, very wrong with academia, specifically as it pertains to Black students and Black academics. And so for me, as someone who's very radical, I want to shake things up, and not afraid to do that.
Yeah.
I think after my experience, number one, I said to myself, I will never, ever put any qualification before to the point where it costs me so dearly, because even after I graduated, I still feel like I'm dealing with remnants of some of the trauma, that happened during trying to get that master's, right? And that's something that doesn't just, kind of disappear just because you've graduated, doesn't end when you get that scroll. It's stuff that still sits with you, and you're like, geez, I really wish I hadn't had to go through that. And I think for me now, that particular experience has added to how I felt already in the past. But now I'm very clear that when I become an academic, when I become a lecturer, and I take on Black students, they are going to have a different experience as a postgraduate with me versus with other, supervisors. I'm going to practice empathy. I'm going to meet them where they're at. And so long as they're willing to work hard, to put in the effort, I want them to want to come back. There's always this conversation around, why don't Black students want to do PhDs?
Yes.
Why don't they want to do postdocs? And, on the one hand, it's a very multifaceted issue. On the one hand, it is Black tax. Black students often need to finish school and start work because they need to support their families and their communities. But on the other hand, sometimes even, someone like me who in the conventional sense doesn't have Black tax, I can just continue studying and studying and studying. It becomes undesirable because you see what other kids, Black kids, are going through. And you're like, I don't want to do that. Let me rather go work.
Yes.
So I want, in my small way, even if it's only within my little office in that little department at that particular university, I want Black students to say, hey, I want her to be my supervisor, because the way she goes about it is so incredibly human. It inspires me to potentially want to go into academia, or to at least do this qualification, especially if the student has been, kind of fearful or hesitant to do it because of everything that you hear, Black students going through on a daily basis. So yeah, that is really the intention. And I think to a large extent, my experience has really solidified my desire to want to be that academic for Black students, especially.
No, that's fantastic. And I love this new era of young academics who are coming up and who aspire to, I love this new up and coming young academics who have realized, hey, I want to be the change. We want to get more people who look like us into these fields of science, because like you said, that due to other various many things, some people couldn't get to even if they wanted to. But now, you have young academics who are making science and academia look cool. They dress cool. They don't look like the typical academics. They are cool, and they drink so many other various things. And at the same time, like you said, they are human. They understand, hey, mental health issues are a thing. Hey, sometimes something is going on at home. It's not always about deadlines. Of course, in some cases, it is what it is. But I really can't wait until you become a lecturer or a professor or a supervisor to the students, because I think you have developed that keen emotional intelligence that is needed to create that support for all of these students. So yeah, I can't wait, and we'll be sure to be seeing it on the Twitter screen. We'll be sure to be seeing
Absolutely.
it on the Twitter screen. So okay, before we get there, before you become this amazing supervisor, currently you are working.
Yes.
And you mentioned in your introduction that you are a digital epidemiologist. Okay. I've never heard the term before. So before we get into what you actually do, can you just explain to us what is a digital epidemiologist? I can't even say this word properly, epidemiologist. Yeah, that part. Epidemiologist.
Don't worry,
I got it.
No, that word always trips people up. And then they're
Oh.
like, so you study the skin? And I'm like, no, that's a dermatologist, So yeah, I'm a digital epidemiologist. So it's an emerging field, really all that means is usually epidemiologists are out in the field. If you look at COVID right now, collecting data, bringing us the figures, the stats, the projections, telling us, some of the preventive measures we can take. So that's really traditional field epidemiology, right? But digital epidemiology is also, still very young. It's an emerging field. And all that is, taking someone with an epidemiology background and experience and putting them in the digital health space. So when we're talking about digital health, usually we're talking about things like data science, what we call predictive analytics, which is largely a function of machine learning and artificial intelligence. So it's really an epidemiologist who is working within the digital health space. Having said that, I think I'm the only digital epidemiologist in the country, possibly on the continent, because it's not a thing that is really common. I mean, right now we're still trying to kind of strengthen, traditional epidemiology, monitoring and evaluation, surveillance, so very few people are thinking about digital epidemiology. But having said that, absolutely hate my job. And, you and I have had this conversation before. I am leaving very soon.
I love how we went straight into this. Like, well, actually, I'm not doing this anymore. Yes, continue.
So I think, it's an interesting space to be in, undoubtedly, the company that I work for, they do a lot of cool stuff in HIV research, but I think on their end, it was very premature for them to develop this role of digital epidemiologist. So, what I was sold, in the interview, that you're going to be doing this and you're going to be advising us and you're going to be designing experiments, very much like a traditional, epidemiologist, and using my expertise. Really, all I have been doing, for the most part, is very generic things like writing project reports, creating client presentations, interacting with clients. And, I do feel like it is shortchanging the expertise that I have. I find that, a lot of the external work that I do, especially with addressing COVID vaccine hesitancy, a lot of the consultancy work that I do, I find so much meaning and impact in that. And I feel like I'm utilizing my expertise. But in this role as a digital epidemiologist, I think they were excited about the possibility of having this very novel role and having this person with this expertise. But I don't think they fully fleshed out what they wanted me to do, and also considered, what I wanted to do. And so, I've made the decision that, 6 months in, I'm done. I'm going to be resigning and I'm going to be moving on. I have ambitions of starting my PhD in January. And, the path is very clear. I want to become an academic. Obviously, I'll always be a writer. I'll always do the consulting because I am a very dynamic individual. But I do want to be an epidemiologist in the full sense of the word and the profession. And because I'm not getting it at this job, I've just made the decision that I'm not going to do it. And so, a girl's going to be leaving next year, beginning of next year.
Whoa, listen, like if anybody is sitting here and they're like, I hate what I'm doing and it doesn't align with my vision, I hope this message, if you take anything from this interview, I hope it's this part, because that is so bold, that is so brave, and I'm just so proud of you for just being so clear and sure of what you want and being like, yes, even though the money, whatever, or the title sounds nice, but it doesn't align with what I'm doing. And like you said, you feel very undervalued. You're not being fully utilized. And sometimes, these titles are so decorative, like, oh no, you're going to be the face of whatever. And there's that thing, especially with the Black, okay, I'm going to bring color into this, but, especially with being a Black female, they love tokenizing women. And I'm not saying that that's what your company is doing, but this is me just speaking generalistically. But giving these glorified titles without actually the work and without the the recognition and actually allowing you to use these expertise in inverted commas that they've hired or that they want you to do, but they just want to have that person who's here. So I love the fact that you are like, nope, this is no longer serving me, you know, because you could have stayed, you could have been like, no, maybe I'm gonna, you know, maybe I will, maybe it's gonna, but you didn't, and you're like, nope, I'm moving on. So I love that. It's so bold, and this is why I fangirl about you. Like, what? Come on. This is why. So next year you are starting your PhD. Hey, so is it going to be in digital oh gosh, you know what I mean, that word.
Oh no, girl. Not digital epidemiology.
You're leaving that as whole. It's just you're doing epidemiology as the sense of it, the real crux of it. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So as I did it in my master's, which was the epidemiology and the biostatistics, I'm, you know, still going to be doing it in. So it'll probably, you know, be a PhD in public health, specializing in epidemiology and biostatistics. And, you know, of course, my topic of interest is going to be, I'm going to be looking at COVID-19 vaccine hesitancy. But what I actually want to do is potentially build statistical models that can predict the kind of South African who is willing to get a COVID-19 vaccine shot and who is not, right? And, you know, it's good to have qualitative factors. Those are really good because it helps us, you know, understand the population. What are they thinking? But also, once you start building these statistical models from a quantitative perspective, you can actually start predicting, hey, if this person has been reading information from WhatsApp and this particular website, and they are part of this, and there are all these things that we call predictive factors, you know, the model can literally then be able to predict, you know, to an extent, if the person has this profile, they're more likely to say no to getting the vaccine versus this person who is more likely to say yes to getting the vaccine. And of course, this vaccine hesitancy thing exists on a spectrum. On you know, the extreme end of it, you've got anti-vaxxer sentiments. And I always say those are a well-established community and group of people for whom there is no logical argument that you can make to convince them that getting a vaccine is the best thing for them or their loved ones or even their children, right? But people who are vaccine hesitant, and again, that exists on a spectrum, you know, often people who might not have access to the right information, they might have been told something, even maybe by a doctor, you know, who's supposed to be this authority figure, right? And so it starts creating all of these, you know, uncertainties and anxieties, which ultimately creates this hesitancy, right? And that's what we're largely seeing in South Africa. We don't really struggle with anti-vaxxer sentiments like countries in countries like the US, you know, and certain parts of the UK, but we are struggling with vaccine hesitancy. One of the major things behind that has unfortunately been misinformation. And that's why, you know, in a lot of my consulting work, I have been addressing, you know, the misinformation head on, saying, I know you've heard this, but let me tell you, this is what the science says, you know. So that's what I'm hoping to do for my PhD. Look at some of the qualitative factors that have affected South Africans specifically in terms of hesitancy. But of course, I'm a numbers go. I also want to see what are the stats saying, what are those models saying? And hopefully if we build a model that's able to predict the likelihood of someone taking up a COVID-19 vaccine or not, the next time we have a pandemic, which is of course always going to be a possibility, and with climate change and all of that, something that, you know, we always have to know is on the horizon, that is information we could potentially use to build on to then predict, oh, in the event of the next pandemic, what is the profile of a person, you know, going to look like who is likely to take the vaccine for this new disease, and, you know, what is the profile of a person who is unlikely to take this new vaccine. So that's the work that I'm hoping to do for my PhD starting from next year.
Oh, so exciting. So exciting. I love this work. It's very important, especially from a South African perspective, because like you said, I don't think in South Africa or even most other African countries is that people are just unaware. They don't know the information, you know, WhatsApp, Facebook, people are just sharing random screenshots which are unverified, and people just get blown away by the fake news, if I can call it that. So
For sure.
and I mean, if somebody follows you, and if somebody, after they're done and they follow you on your social medias, you actually actively work to do this on your timeline, where you actually create polls where you tell people like, hey, do you want some things? And I love that aspect that you do. And it's so beautiful that you're taking it to your PhD, and we're going to just, and I think that's going to be such a beautiful marriage, because you're going to be doing something that you're actually very passionate about, because sometimes people do things just because the funder wants to do something. So we can tell, you know, as people who are just actively watching you, that this is something that you do. You've spoken on national TV on it, you know, and even when you speak about it, I listen to you and I'm like, oh snap, you know, this is so interesting. And you are so clear and so articulate, and like you said, that you don't go around telling people this is what you must do. I like how your approach in terms of saying, I've heard you, I mean, I know you've heard this, but I'd like to tell you why this isn't and this is. And like you said, the numbers aspects also kind of builds confidence. So oh wow, fantastic, and so exciting. You know, this work is so important, and I just wish you all of the best, and especially because currently now we're experiencing the fourth wave, that more people get this information out there. I mean, you know, there's so many things that you just wish people would understand more, because I think once people get given the chance to be explained to, and not to just be bombarded with, you should do this, you know, but just in a manner that people can actually accept it, hopefully we can sort of see an uptake of more people in the African countries to take up the vaccine. So I can't wait, and I hope people follow you, and because she shares some really amazing content, guys, like, you know, please follow her. What is your handle, just so that everybody can follow you?
So I'm mainly active, you know, on Twitter. That's where I share a lot of information and, you know, talk a lot about, you know, science and all that. So my Twitter handle is at Rufaro_Samanga.
Yes, so that's her name and her surname, which is going to be on this podcast. Check her out. Check out the stuff that she does. And also she shares about other stuff as well. So please don't just go there thinking it's just her.
Yeah, no, I'm a multi-diamond. You know, on one day you'll hear about vaccines. On other days you'll hear about my new partner and finding love. On other days you'll hear
we love it.
It's important to be a multi-dimensional human being.
You are. We are more than just the science. Rufaro, you have taught us and you've shared so much. And I've had such a nice time chatting with you. As we wrap, would you please just share with us a little golden nugget of some advice that you can give to somebody who's listening, be it about life or in science? Just what would you like anybody to take with you after everything that you've said?
You know what, I think, and, you know, and I always preface this by saying that the most cliche sounding things are usually the most truest things in life. And authenticity is very important to me. And one of my favorite Black women is the late Dr. Maya Angelou. And she said, tell the truth first to yourself and then to everyone else. And I think that's something that I try to the best of my ability to do. And, you know, even when it comes to my career trajectory, whatever it is that I have done, at the time that I've done it, it has felt most authentic to me at the time. And as soon as it has stopped being authentic, you know, I've had to say to myself, hey, do you still want to do this? And if the answer is no, I then make a decision and I move on. So I'm always operating from a place of what is the truth to me. What is my truth? And I think if you're courageous enough to be honest with yourself about what it is that you want, and more so what it is that you don't want, I think you'll find that it's not necessarily easier to navigate life, but I think clarity brings with it a certain kind of peace and reassurance that things are going to work out. Sometimes you're worried about, what am I going to study? Am I on the right path? Am I going to get the right job? And I've been there, you know, many times, but I think I always come down to trying to really just be very truthful with myself, you know, and then to others. So once I'm able to articulate, this is what I want, and this is most definitely what I do not want, then I can articulate it to everyone else. And then I found that the most clarity, you know, usually enters my life at that point. And things always have a way of working out, but you have to tell the truth to yourself first, and then you have to tell it to everyone else.
Beautiful. Oh, be authentic self. And you're right. This is cliche.
Sure.
And you know what? A friend of mine, okay, no, she listens to this podcast. So it's my twin. She's my cousin.
Yeah.
Shout out to her. She always says that cliches are cliches because they happen, or in this case they are true. So the fact that it is a cliche, it means that it's right, because it's fact. Thank you so much for sharing your journey with us and just inspiring us and teaching us. I can't wait to see what you're gonna do, because oh girl, I know you're gonna do some amazing things.
Thank you.
I'm always in awe of what you're doing, and at the same time, like you said, because you are so authentic, it's beautiful, because you do tell us that, hey, it's hard, it's not easy, because sometimes people only share the good stuff and they think, oh wow, it's so easy, I want to be like you, but you're like, no, hey, sometimes it's hard, sometimes it's difficult. And I think that's why it makes your wins even more amazing for us as bystanders to watch, because we are like, we know that this didn't just happen. She did have her moments where lifed, but she came back up and she's doing it. So I can't wait, and I hope one day, not even I hope, I know one day we're gonna do this on a bigger platform with this podcast, when we've got people and a chair, and we're gonna do this again, and we're gonna be like, remember that time that you came on and you are Dr. Samanga and you're telling me about the work that you're doing and your students. Like, I already have goosebumps just thinking about this. So I cannot wait. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much just for the affirmation. People will say to me, oh my gosh, I'm fangirling. And I'm just like, guys, it's me. It's little me. Sometimes you're just like, I'm just doing normal people things. But then, sometimes when you really have a conversation with others, you're like, oh, okay, I'm actually doing quite a bit. And then, kind of just have to regroup and also kind of just acknowledge what you're doing, so you also don't get lost in trying to get the next thing, but you're not in the moment and acknowledging kind of the impact of what it is that you're doing. So thank you for even wanting me to be on your podcast. I really appreciate it. I've had so much fun talking about science and everything else, and I think this is a very important podcast. So I just as a fellow young Black woman, I'm extremely proud of you for just highlighting the sciences, but highlighting, the stories at the heart of the science. I think that's so important.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And to everybody else who's tuned in, before I start crying here, to everybody else who's tuned in, thank you so much for tuning into another episode of the Root of the Science podcast with your girl, and with an E. Until next time, goodbye.